David Morgan was a man of many words, yet none of them could fill the silence in his life. A celebrated author living in Boston, David's novels were known for their depth and emotional resonance. Critics admired his ability to weave complex stories, but few knew that his inspiration stemmed from a deeply personal wound, the loss of his wife Clara, 15 years ago. The years had been kind to his career but brutal to his soul. Success brought him accolades, wealth, and recognition, but it couldn't replace what he had lost. Clara's death had left a void so profound that no amount of literary brilliance could mend it. Despite living in a city buzzing with life, David found solace only in solitude. His apartment, filled with books and awards, felt more like a mausoleum than a home. On stormy nights, David often walked aimlessly through Boston's cobblestone streets, seeking the comfort of memories he couldn't let go of. Rain seemed to mirror his mood, relentless and heavy, washing over him like the grief he carried. It was on one such evening, as the rain drummed against the pavement, that David noticed her. Under the awning of an old cafe, a young woman sat huddled, clutching a small child. Her clothes were damp, her hair plastered to her face, and her arms wrapped protectively around the baby. Something about her stopped David in his tracks. For a moment, he hesitated. It wasn't like him to get involved in the lives of strangers, yet as he looked at the woman's trembling frame and the serene face of the sleeping baby, something stirred within him. It wasn't just her vulnerability. It was as if he saw his own grief mirrored in her. Memories of Clara's gentle touch and the dreams they once shared flickered through his mind. But it wasn't just her vulnerability. It was as if he saw his own grief mirrored in her. Her desperation reminded him of the long, lonely nights when he wished for Clara to return, to erase the silence that consumed his world. David tightened his coat and stepped forward, unaware that this simple act of compassion would change his life forever. David approached the young woman cautiously, the sound of his footsteps nearly drowned out by the rain. Up close, she looked even more fragile. Her hands, trembling from the cold, cradled the baby with a tenderness that tugged at something deep within him. The child, wrapped in a thin blanket, was quiet, its small face peaceful despite the dreary surroundings. "Are you all right?" David asked, his voice gentle but uncertain. The woman looked up at him, startled. Her eyes were wide and filled with exhaustion, a mixture of fear and relief flickering across her face. "We're fine," she replied, though her hoarse voice betrayed her words. David glanced at the baby, then back at her. "You don't look fine. Do you have somewhere to stay?" She hesitated, her lips parting as if to answer, but then she closed them again. The silence that followed was telling. David reached into his pocket, pulling out a small stack of bills he had withdrawn earlier that day. "Here," he said, holding it out to her. "It's not much, but it should get you some food and a warm place for the night." The woman's eyes widened as she stared at the money, her hands hesitating before she reached out to take it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you so much." David nodded, unsure of what else to say. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Why are you helping me?" He paused, the question hanging in the air. Why was he helping her? David had spent years walking through life with blinders on, detached from the world around him. Yet something about her vulnerability, the way she clung to the child, reminded him of a life he had lost long ago. A life filled with love, warmth, and hope. "I don't know," he admitted, his tone softer now, "but take care of yourself. And the baby." With that, he walked away, the rain soaking through his coat. Yet despite the chill, he felt a strange warmth spreading through him, a connection, however fleeting, that he hadn't felt in years. As he continued down the street, the image of the woman and her child lingered in his mind. Little did David know, this seemingly insignificant encounter was the beginning of something much larger than himself. The next morning, David followed his usual routine. He woke early, dressed in his neatly pressed shirt and coat, and prepared for his visit to Clara's grave. It was a ritual he had maintained for years, a solemn pilgrimage to the small cemetery on the outskirts of Boston. As he stepped into the gray morning, the world around him mirrored his mood, quiet and subdued, with the faint chill of rain lingering in the air. The cemetery gates creaked as he pushed them open, his footsteps crunching on the damp gravel path. David turned the familiar corner toward Clara's grave, his heart heavy as always. But as he approached, he froze. Someone was already there. Kneeling before the gravestone was the young woman he had helped the night before. She cradled her baby, her shoulders shaking as though she were crying. David stood still, his mind racing. Why was she here? How did she know Clara? "Excuse me?" he said cautiously, his voice breaking the stillness. The woman turned abruptly, startled. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she quickly wiped her face with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to intrude." David stepped closer, his confusion growing. "You were outside the cafe last night," he said slowly. "I gave you money. But what are you doing here? How do you know Clara?" For a moment, the woman hesitated. She glanced down at her baby, as if gathering the strength to speak. "Clara," she said softly, her voice trembling, "was my mother." David felt the ground shift beneath him. He stared at her, his breath caught in his throat. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Clara never had a child. She would have told me." The woman shook her head, her expression somber. "She did," she said quietly. "She had me. She just never told you." David's mind reeled, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. Clara had been everything to him, and yet here was a secret so monumental it threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew about her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Lila," she replied, her tone steady despite the tears in her eyes. "And this," she looked down at the baby in her arms, "this is Elliot, your grandson." The words hit David like a tidal wave. He stumbled back, his legs unsteady. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "That can't be. Clara wouldn't have kept this from me. She wouldn't." "I didn't know about you either," Lila said softly. "Not until recently. I was adopted after she died. I never knew her. But when I found out her name, I had to come. I had to know who she was. And who you are." David stared at her, his heart pounding. The woman before him was a stranger, yet her features, her eyes, the curve of her face, bore an unmistakable resemblance to Clara. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cemetery was silent save for the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. Finally, David found his voice. "Why now? Why are you here?" Lila's gaze met his, her eyes filled with pain, but also a quiet determination. "Because I needed to know the truth," she said. "And I think you do too." David felt his chest tighten as he looked at her and Elliot. The revelation was overwhelming, but beneath the shock, there was something else. A faint glimmer of hope. David's thoughts raced as he stood in the quiet cemetery. Lila's revelation echoed in his mind, each word piercing through the veil of grief and memory he had carried for years. Clara had a daughter she had never told him about. The realization stung, not just as a betrayal, but as an unraveling of the life he thought he had shared with her. "You said you were adopted?" David began, his voice trembling. Did Clara say anything about me? About why she didn't tell me?" Lila shook her head, her expression softening. "No, I never knew her, not really. I was just a baby when she passed. But I found this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn with age and creased from being handled so many times. "It's a letter. I found it among the things left behind by my adoptive parents." David took the letter with shaking hands, his heart pounding as he unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's, elegant and familiar, yet the words felt like they belonged to someone he no longer recognized. "David," I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to give you this letter, but I need to write it. I'm pregnant. I don't know how to tell you because I know you've always said children aren't part of our plan. I can't risk losing you, and I can't burden you with something you didn't ask for. So I've decided to keep this to myself. Please forgive me if this is wrong. I'm doing what I think is best for us." The words blurred as tears filled David's eyes. He had never said he didn't want children, not in any serious way. Perhaps in passing when they were young and carefree, but he had always assumed they would have the conversation when the time was right. That conversation never came. "She was scared," Lila said gently, watching him. "I think she thought she was protecting you, even if it meant keeping you in the dark." David swallowed hard, clutching the letter as if it were a lifeline. The pain of Clara's decision was sharp, but so was the love behind it. She hadn't kept the secret to hurt him. She had done it out of fear. Fear of losing him. Fear of the unknown. For a long moment, David stood silently, his gaze fixed on Clara's gravestone. Then he turned to Lila, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I can't change what happened," he said softly, "but I can try to make things right now." Lila's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she nodded. "That's all I wanted. For us to try." David glanced down at Elliot, who cooed softly in Lila's arms. The weight of regret remained, but in its place, a new resolve began to take root. David wanted to believe Lila. Her story, the uncanny resemblance to Clara, and even the small gestures that reminded him of his late wife all seemed genuine. Yet, after years of living with the pain of losing Clara, trusting this new reality didn't come easily. The doubt gnawed at him late into the night. What if this was some mistake? What if her intentions weren't pure? The questions, though unfair, refused to leave his mind. One evening, after Lila and Elliot had left his apartment following a brief visit, David sat alone, grappling with his thoughts. His gaze fell on a strand of hair Lila had unknowingly left behind on the back of a chair. He froze, guilt creeping up his spine. Was he crossing a line? Was he betraying the fragile trust they had begun to build? Yet the fear of being wrong, of clinging to a hope that might shatter, gnawed at him. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he sealed the hair in an envelope. "This isn't about her," he muttered to himself. "It's about the truth." Hesitation gripped him. Was this the right thing to do? He hesitated, guilt rising in his chest. Was this the right thing to do? After a long pause, he picked it up carefully and sealed it in a small envelope. The next day, David submitted his own sample to a DNA testing service, along with Lila's. He told himself it wasn't about mistrust. It was about certainty. He needed to know not just for himself, but to fully open his heart to her and Elliot. Over the next week, David continued to see Lila. Their relationship began to shift from cautious conversations to genuine moments of connection. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, David found himself laughing as Elliot, toddling unsteadily, tried to chase a squirrel. The boy's giggles filled the crisp autumn air, and for a moment, David felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. Still, the weight of the unanswered question remained. When the results finally arrived, David sat alone at his desk, staring at the envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it. The report was clear. Lila was his biological daughter. Relief washed over him, followed swiftly by guilt. How could he have doubted her? How could he have questioned her sincerity when she had come to him with nothing but honesty and vulnerability? That evening, David invited Lila over. As they sat in the living room, Elliot playing on the floor between them, he decided to tell her the truth. "I need to apologize," David began, his voice heavy. Lila looked at him, her expression a mix of curiosity and hesitation. "For what?" I had a DNA test done," he admitted. "I needed to be sure." Lila's eyes widened, but instead of anger, a small, knowing smile crossed her face. "I get it," she said quietly. "Honestly, I might have done the same thing if I were you." David exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "It confirmed what I already knew," he said softly. "You're my daughter. And I'm so sorry for doubting you." Lila placed her hand lightly on his arm. "We're both figuring this out," she said. "I understand." As Elliot crawled into David's lap, babbling happily, David held him close. The doubts were gone, replaced by a deep sense of connection and responsibility. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully embrace this unexpected family. Weeks after the DNA results confirmed what David now felt in his heart, he decided it was time to take the next step. Lila had been hesitant to accept too much help, but David could see the strain of her current situation. The shelters weren't safe, and Elliot deserved more stability. One rainy evening, David stood outside the shelter where Lila and Elliot were staying. The building loomed against the dark sky, its faded sign illuminated by a flickering streetlight. David clutched an umbrella in one hand and a small suitcase he had bought for Lila in the other. When Lila stepped outside with Elliot bundled in her arms, her face lit up in surprise. "David?" she said, her voice laced with both confusion and relief. "I'm here to take you home," David said simply. Lila blinked, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know if we should—" "You should," David interrupted, his tone firm but kind. "It's not charity, Lila. It's family. You and Elliot belong with me." Lila stared at him, her emotions tangled between gratitude and hesitation. For so long she had relied only on herself, guarding her heart against disappointment. But as she looked at David's steady gaze, she saw something different. An unwavering kindness that felt safe, a promise that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to face the world alone anymore. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Okay." The drive to David's home was quiet, filled with the soft hum of the car engine and Elliot's occasional babbling from his car seat. When they arrived, David helped Lila with her bags and opened the door to his warm, book-filled apartment. "This is your home now," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "No more shelters. No more uncertainty. Just family." As Lila settled Elliot into the crib David had set up in a spare bedroom, she turned to him. "Thank you." "Dad," she said softly. The word struck David like a beam of light cutting through years of darkness. It was so simple, so small, yet it carried a weight he hadn't realized he longed to feel. For years he had lived in silence, his world echoing only with memories of Clara. And now, in that one word, Lila had offered him something he thought he'd lost forever. Belonging, his voice caught in his throat, but he managed a shaky smile. "You don't know how much that means to me," he said. David froze, the words striking him like a lightning bolt. It was the first time she had called him Dad. His heart swelled, and for a moment, he struggled to find his voice. "You don't know how much that means to me," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. Lila smiled, and for the first time, David saw not just Clara's features in her, but also a strength and kindness that was all her own. That night, as David sat in the living room, the soft sounds of Lila and Elliot in the background, he felt something he hadn't in years: contentment. His home, once a sanctuary for grief, was now filled with laughter and hope. David had spent years mourning the family he thought he had lost, only to discover it had been waiting for him all along. As David opened his heart to Lila and Elliot, he found something he thought he'd lost forever: hope, connection, and a reason to move forward. Life is full of unexpected moments like these. Moments that remind us of the power of family, love, and second chances. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales like this. Let us take you on more journeys of discovery, healing, and the beauty of human connection. Click that subscribe button and join us in celebrating stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul.